Picture this. It's 1912, you're a wealthy Chicago businessman, and you just spent your life savings on the perfect golf retreat in Lake Zurich, Illinois. You've got rolling fairways, pristine greens, and a beautiful clubhouse where University of Chicago professors debate philosophy over brandy. Life is pretty good. Then one day, a railroad company shows up at your door with a piece of paper that says they're taking half your property whether you like it or not. What do? Well, if you're Charlie Wood and the members of the Lake Zurich Golf Club, you do what any reasonable person would do. You steal 4 dead bodies from a medical school, bury them on your golf course, and declare your country club a cemetery. Welcome to one of the most bizarre, brilliant, and absolutely fetch legal maneuvers in American history. This is the story of how a handful of Chicago's elite literally used dead people to stop a railroad dead in its tracks. The golden age of golf and trains. To understand this incredible story, we need to step back to the Gilded Age of America. It's 1895 and Chicago is booming. The world's Columbian Exposition just showcased the city to the world. Fortunes are being made in steel and meatpacking, and the wealthy are looking for places to escape the smoke and noise of the rapidly growing city. Enter the Lake Zurich Golf Club. Founded in 1895 by a group of lawyers and professors from the University of Chicago, they purchased 70 acres of beautiful rolling land northwest of Chicago for $7,500, about $275,000 in today's money. Their vision was simple: create a private retreat where gentlemen could play golf, discuss important matters, and get away from the hustle and bustle of city life. The club was chartered as a golf course and retreat for men only. Women and children wouldn't be allowed into the clubhouse until 1946, which gives you an idea of just how exclusive and traditional this place was. The 9-hole golf course was laid out by James B. Fowlis from the St. Andrews Club in Scotland, because if you're going to build a golf course, you might as well get the best. But while the golf club was establishing itself as a bastion of old world tradition, America was in the midst of a railroad boom. By the 1870s and 1880s, railroad lines were stretching across the country like a massive steel spiderweb, connecting every town and city to the growing network of commerce and transportation. The first railway in Lake County was the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad, which arrived in Waukegan to much fanfare in 1855. By the early 1900s, railroad fever had reached even the smallest communities, and towns without railroad connections feared being left behind in the march of progress. The railroad comes to Lake Zurich. Now here's where our story gets interesting. The town of Waukegan, a few miles north of Lake Zurich, was desperate for a railroad connection. The townspeople had watched other communities grow and prosper with railroad access while they remained isolated in the countryside. Finally, in 1911, their dreams came true. Plans were announced for the Palatine, Lake Zurich, and the Waukegan Railroad, the PLZ&W for short. This would be a branch line connecting the Chicago and Northwestern Railway at Palatine to the town of Waukegan with stops in between. Ground broke on the railroad in August 1911, and everything seemed to be going smoothly. The railroad company purchased an 1885 built engine from the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad and named it Old Maud. Real photo postcards were made of the dedication ceremony with the first train arriving in Waukegan. It looked like a classic American success story, but there was one small problem. The most direct route from Palatine to Waukegan happened to run right through the property of the Lake Zurich Golf Club. Now, in the early 1900s, railroads had tremendous power. They could use eminent domain, the legal principle that allows the government to take private property for public use with compensation to acquire land for their route. Railroad companies were essentially given the authority to take whatever land they needed as long as they paid what was deemed fair market value. For the PLZ&W Railroad, the Lake Zurich Golf Club property represented the most efficient and cost-effective route. Why build around the golf course when you could just take the land you needed and pay the owners whatever the court decided it was worth? The legal challenge. When the PLZ&W Railroad announced its intention to condemn part of the golf club property in 1912, Charlie Wood and the club members faced a crisis. This wasn't just about money, though losing part of their carefully designed course would certainly be expensive. This was about the survival of their exclusive retreat. Wood and the other members were lawyers, professors, and businessmen. They understood how the legal system worked, and they knew that fighting eminent domain in court was usually a losing battle. Railroad companies had deep pockets, political connections, and the legal precedent was clearly on their side. But Charlie Wood was not the type of man to give up easily. He started researching the legal intricacies of eminent domain law, looking for any loophole or exception that might save the club. And that's when he made a discovery that would change everything. Wood discovered that a cemetery cannot be condemned under eminent domain law. Think about that for a moment. In the hierarchy of American legal protections, there are very few things that are truly untouchable. Private property can be taken for public use. Businesses can be forced to relocate. Even churches and schools can be condemned if the public need is great enough. But cemeteries? Cemeteries are sacred. The legal system recognizes that disturbing the dead is not just impractical, it's morally unacceptable. The sanctity of burial grounds trumps even the mighty power of eminent domain. Wood had found his loophole: the body heist. Now, having discovered that cemeteries were immune to condemnation, Wood faced a small but significant problem. The Lake Zurich Golf Club was not a cemetery, it was a golf course. To claim cemetery protection, they would need to actually have dead people buried on the property. And that's where the story takes a turn that would make the writers of Ocean's 11 proud. Wood and his fellow club members, remember, these were doctors, lawyers, and professors from the University of Chicago, hatched a plan that was equal parts brilliant and kind of gross. They would acquire dead bodies and bury them on the golf course, instantly transforming their recreational facility into a legally protected cemetery. But where does one acquire dead bodies in 1912? Well, if you're well-connected doctors in Chicago, you go to the source, the medical schools. According to the records, 4 cadavers went mysteriously missing from Chicago's Rush Medical School. Now, the official story is that these were unclaimed bodies from the county morgue, people who had died with no family to claim them and no money for burial. In those days, such bodies were routinely donated to medical schools for anatomical study. The doctors, who were also club members, went to the county morgue for the unclaimed bodies of 4 deceased men. They transported these bodies to the golf course and gave them a proper burial, probably the most respectful treatment these unfortunate souls had received in their entire lives. The 4 men who became the unlikely saviors of the Lake Zurich Golf Club were Lathrop Washington, Terrence O'Brien, Irving Cohen, and Jackson Washington Johnson. Look at those names for a moment. Washington, possibly named after George Washington, O'Brien, clearly Irish, Cohen, Jewish, Johnson, possibly Scandinavian or English. These 4 men represented the great American melting pot, united in death to serve a purpose none of them could have imagined in life. The cemetery gambit. With the bodies properly interred, Wood moved to the next phase of his plan. The Lake Zurich Golf Club was officially incorporated as a cemetery. A tombstone was erected bearing the names of the 4 deceased men. Signs were posted marking the ad hoc cemetery. Legal paperwork was filed with the appropriate authorities, and just like that, the Lake Zurich Golf Club had transformed itself from a recreational facility into a legally protected burial ground. When the PLZ and W Railroad arrived with their condemnation papers, they were met with a surprise. The golf club's lawyers informed them that the property was now a cemetery and therefore could not be condemned under eminent domain law. Picture the scene: railroad executives, armed with the full power of eminent domain and backed by state and federal law, stopped cold by 4 dead bodies in a cleverly worded legal document. These captains of industry, who had bulldozed their way across the American landscape for decades, suddenly found themselves powerless against the sanctuary of the grave. The railroad company's lawyers scrambled to find a legal challenge to this maneuver. They argued that the cemetery was a sham, a transparent attempt to circumvent a legitimate eminent domain proceeding. They pointed out that the golf club had operated for 17 years without any burials, that the cemetery designation was obviously a last-minute legal fiction. But the law was clear: a cemetery is a cemetery. The presence of human remains, properly buried and marked, created legal protection that even the mighty railroad industry could not overcome. The PLZ and W Railroad had no choice. They could spend years and enormous amounts of money fighting this legal challenge in court with no guarantee of success, or they could simply reroute their railroad around the golf club property. They chose to reroute. The railroad's response and ultimate fate. Fortunately for the town of Waukegan, the cemetery gambit only caused a short delay while the railroad rerouted its tracks. The PLZ and W purchased property to the east of the golf club and built their line around the newly established cemetery. In 1913, Old Maud, the 1885 built engine purchased from the Chicago Northwestern Railroad, made its inaugural run on the new line. The dedication ceremony was a huge celebration, with real photo postcards commemorating the first train arriving in Waukegan. After years of dreaming about railroad access, the townspeople finally had their connection to the wider world. But the story of the PLZ and W Railroad was destined to be short and bittersweet. The little railroad faced challenges from the beginning. It never attracted enough passengers during the winter months, and it quickly began losing customers to the growing popularity of automobiles and trucks. The timing couldn't have been worse. Just as the railroad was getting established, Henry Ford's Model T was making automobiles affordable for the middle-class Americans. Roads were being improved, and people were discovering the freedom and convenience of personal transportation. The railroad changed names to the Chicago, Palatine, and Waukegan Railroad in 1921, but the name change couldn't solve the fundamental problem. America was falling out of love with small railroad lines and in love with the automobile. In 1924, only 11 years after its promising start, the dream of the PLZ&W Railroad came to an end. The company went bankrupt and the rails were scrapped. Old Maud was sold off, and the railroad that had seemed so threatening to the Lake Zurich Golf Club simply vanished into history. It's ironic when you think about it. The golf club members went to extraordinary lengths to prevent the railroad from taking their property, but they probably could have just waited a dozen years and the railroad would have disappeared on its own. The club's golden age. With the railroad threat eliminated, the Lake Zurich Golf Club settled into what would become its golden age. The club attracted some of the most prominent names in Chicago business, politics, and culture. Leo Burnett, who ran a world-renowned advertising company and created iconic characters like the Marlboro Man and Tony the Tiger, served as club president in the early 1960s. He boasted that Lake Zurich was the oldest club on the same location west of the Allegheny Mountains. Other notable members included Daniel Burnham Jr., designer of the 1933 World's Fair; Charles Dawes, nephew of Charles G. Dawes, who served as Vice President of the United States; Harold Smith, founder of ITW, Illinois Tool Works; various physicians, attorneys, brokers, and business leaders. The club's membership was deliberately kept small. Most of the time, there were about 30 to 35 members. This wasn't just exclusivity for its own sake, it was about maintaining the intimate, retreat-like atmosphere that the founders envisioned. If a member died or resigned, a relative or friend of another member could fill the vacancy. There was no application process in the traditional sense. You had to be sponsored by existing members who knew you personally and could vouch for your character and compatibility with the club's unique culture. The quirky traditions. What makes the Lake Zurich Golf Club truly special isn't just its morbid origin story, it's the absolutely delightful collection of traditions and rules that developed over the decades. First, let's talk about the golf rules, which are unlike anything you find at any other course in America. There shall be no such thing as a lost ball. The missing ball will eventually be found and pocketed by some other player, in which case it becomes a stolen ball. There is no penalty for a stolen ball. This rule recognizes the practical reality of small, intimate courses where everyone knows everyone else. Here's another one. If a putt stops close enough to the cup to inspire such comments as, "You could blow it in," you may blow it in. The rule does not apply if the ball is more than 3 inches from the hole. We have no wish to make a travesty of the game. Yes, you read that correctly. You can literally blow your golf ball into the hole under certain circumstances. Here's another. A ball sliced or hooked into the rough shall be lifted and placed at a point equal to the distance it carried into the rough. It is hardly fair to penalize a player for erratic flight of the ball. This rule essentially eliminates penalties for bad shots that land in the rough, which would be revolutionary at any other golf course. And the last one, a ball hitting a tree shall be deemed not to have hit the tree. This is perhaps the most beautifully absurd golf rule ever written, and I love it. But the quirky rules extend beyond the golf. Here are some others. Members have no handicaps, and the scorecard recognizes both bogey and par, noting that when the game was originated, bogey was believed to be the ideal score. Another, members frequently wear red blazers with green collars and cuffs to club events. They honor a patron saint, Saint Barnabas, said to be a golfer from the 1st century AD. Members have their own preferred stash of liquor and wine in the bar. There are staterooms on the 2nd floor that members can use to sleep it off after dinner before venturing home. Members are expected to back their cars into parking spots, though the reason for this tradition has been lost to time. Weeds and dandelions growing on the putting green may be plucked without penalty. If you find another member's ball, you're encouraged to place it in the glass bowl in the clubhouse where it can eventually be retrieved by its rightful owner. The physical remnants. What makes this story even more remarkable is that you can still see the evidence today. The tombstone, bearing the names of Lathrop Washington, Terrence O'Brien, Irving Cohen, and Jackson Washington Johnson, still stands at the golf course property, permanent reminder of the club's unusual legal maneuver. The Lake Zurich Golf Club continues to operate at 564 North Old Rand Road in Lake Zurich, Illinois. It remains a private club with only about 35 to 40 members, making it one of the smallest and most exclusive golf clubs in the Chicago area. The clubhouse itself is a testament to the club's long history. Some members believe the house is haunted, especially in the attic where noises are regularly heard and objects are believed to have moved on their own. Whether these are the spirits of 4 buried men keeping watch over the property that they helped save, or just the creaking of an old building, is a matter of debate. My money is on raccoons. A pink bench is preserved where Marilyn Monroe reportedly once sat while visiting the club with her husband Joe DiMaggio. The horse-drawn Surrey wagon that used to transport members from the Barrington train station sits in the club's driveway. Until the second half of the 20th century, sheep were still used to maintain the club's fairways. The legal legacy. The cemetery gambit employed by the Lake Zurich Golf Club represents one of the most creative uses of legal loopholes in American history. It demonstrates several important principles about law, property rights, and the power of creative thinking. First, it shows the importance of understanding the details of the law. Eminent domain seems like an all-powerful legal tool, but every legal principle has exceptions and limitations. Charlie Wood's research into cemetery protection law revealed a weakness in what appeared to be an unassailable legal position. Second, it illustrates the principle that in American law, form often matters as much as substance. The golf club didn't become a real cemetery in any meaningful sense. They were still primarily a golf club, but by meeting the technical legal requirements for cemetery status, they gained the legal protections that came with it. Third, it demonstrates the power of creative problem solving. Faced with what seemed like an impossible situation, the club members didn't just accept defeat, they found a solution that was unconventional, slightly shocking, but ultimately effective. The legal precedent, while rarely cited, established that cemetery designation can be used as protection against eminent domain, even when the cemetery is clearly secondary to the property's primary use. The ethical questions. Of course, this story raises some interesting ethical questions. Was it right for the golf club members to essentially steal bodies from a medical school, even if they were unclaimed cadavers? Was it fair to use dead people as pawns in a legal chess game? From one perspective, the golf club members were grave robbers who desecrated the dead for their own financial benefit. They took bodies that were meant for medical education and used them as legal shields to protect their wealthy men's club. From another perspective, they gave 4 forgotten souls a proper burial with marked graves and ongoing care, something these men never would have received otherwise. Lathrop Washington, Terrence O'Brien, Irving Cohen, and Jackson Washington Johnson died as paupers with no one to mourn them, but they achieved a kind of immortality as the unlikely heroes who saved a golf course. The club members also genuinely incorporated the property as a cemetery and maintained it as such. This wasn't just a legal fiction, they created actual burial grounds with real tombstones and ongoing maintenance. And let's be honest about the context. A railroad could benefit thousands of people, while a golf course only benefited a few dozen wealthy members. From the railroad's perspective, the golf club's cemetery gambit was a frivolous abuse of the legal system. They were using a technicality to block legitimate economic development, putting their own interests ahead of the broader community needs. But the railroad industry's power had grown so great by the early 1900s that many people welcomed any check on their authority. The modern golf club. Today, the Lake Zurich Golf Club remains one of the most unique and exclusive golf clubs in America. With only 35 to 40 members, it's smaller than many amateur golf leagues. The club doesn't belong to the Chicago District Golf Association, it doesn't keep handicaps, and operates according to its own idiosyncratic rules and traditions. Recent visitors describe it as highly esoteric, very obviously eclectic, but also rooted firmly in tradition. Members still wear their red blazers to formal events, still honor St. Barnabas as their patron saint, and still follow golf rules that exist nowhere else in the world. The club's philosophy seems to be that golf should be fun rather than competitive, social rather than serious. This might seem revolutionary to modern golfers accustomed to precise handicap calculations and strict adherence to the rules, but it actually represents a return to golf's original spirit as a gentleman's pastime rather than a competitive sport. New members are still chosen through personal relationship rather than applications, so if you want to join the Lake Zurich Golf Club, you need to know someone who knows someone who knows someone, and that someone has to be someone that'll believe that you fit into the club's unique culture. If you are that someone, I'd suggest reaching out. The physical facilities remain modest. It's still a 9-hole course. The clubhouse is still the original building with some modifications, and the overall atmosphere is more like a private men's club than a modern golf facility. So, the next time you're driving through Lake Zurich, Illinois, remember that somewhere in that quiet suburb sits a golf course that was saved by dead bodies, a cemetery that doubles as a country club, and a testament to the power of creative thinking in the face of seemingly impossible odds. Hey there, dreamers and hustlers. Ever wondered how an orphan from South Korea ended up making 6 figures on YouTube? Peter Von Panda's story is not your typical rags to riches tale. In his book, The Accidental YouTuber, he reveals how he stumbled into YouTube success without even trying. If you're looking to turn your passion into profit, this book is your roadmap to navigating the wild world of content creation. Don't miss out on the secrets of accidental success.